Hi folks, so the big question, do you upgrade to lithium iron phosphate or do you stick with lead acid batteries? If you're doing a new van build, do you build it with lead acid or do you build it with lithium iron phosphate? That's a question that is asked many times, like really many times, on various forums, on social media like Facebook and various places. It's such a complex topic. There are so many opinions out there. There are absolute diehards that stick with lead acid. There are absolute diehards that go only lithium ion, and there are not that many in between, to be honest. So in this, we're going to throw some, and in fact throw many facts and figures up for you to consider to help you make that decision. So hopefully this will be a fairly unbiased view of whether you should upgrade to lithium ion or whether you should stick with traditional old lead acid. Lead acid has been around for a long time, let's face it, a long time. Lithium iron phosphate has been around really in significant number of installations only for 1 or 2 years. I mean, they've been around for a few more years, but it's only in the last 2 or 3 years, in fact, that a lot of people have been looking at switching over to it. And in the last year or two, a very big swing to lithium iron phosphate. So let's see what this is all about. So to start with, I'm going to take you through basically what it'll cost to build your own DIY lithium iron phosphate battery. Get the cost of that, and then we'll go from there. So to start with, let's briefly run through the cost of the lithium iron phosphate battery. The costs of lead acid are very well known. You've probably bought many of them in your lifetime. And we know that for a 100 amp hour leisure battery, lead acid leisure battery, whether it's floated lead acid or AGM or whatever, even lead carbon, it's roughly $100 or £100 or €100 for a 100 amp hour battery, give or take. That's about the price that you would pay, unless you get a really good deal or unless you're paying stupid prices. Now for lithium iron phosphate, the prices are massively varied. So let's look at 3 scenarios. So in order to do a fair comparison with lead acid, we just need to establish what price we're paying for our lithium iron phosphate battery. The first decision we need to make is how big is this battery going to be? And this is a little bit subjective, but most van owners or motorhome owners or RV owners would have started with 1 or 2 leisure batteries in their vehicles. And as their power needs increased, they wanted a coffee maker, they may have wanted a microwave, they wanted to tour with a laptop that needs charging, somebody needed hair straighteners or a hairdryer or whatever. Most RVs or motorhomes or vans get to the point where they need 2 to 4 batteries that are 100 amp hours each. So 400 amp hours is what a lot of people get to. Some only get to 200 amp hours, some 300, whatever. So let's say, to be fair, we're going to look at a 280 amp hour lithium iron phosphate setup. So that means one of the mistakes people make is they think they're going to buy 4 100 amp hour lithium iron phosphates. Well, it doesn't make sense to do that. You would actually rather go for one single big battery, and for the vast majority of people, one single lithium iron phosphate battery is actually better than several lead acids. So go for one battery, and let's say we are looking at a 200 amp hour lead acid battery, lithium iron phosphate battery. This is a very common setup, and in order to build that, let's look at the absolute cheapest DIY. This is buying cells absolutely cheaply on Alibaba or AliExpress or something like that. So you need 4 cells, and they are, let's call it 100 each. £100, £100, €100 roughly, so 400. You need to build some sort of a case around that, another 10. You need a battery management system. We're not skimping on this now, we're going for a fairly decent one. You can get them really cheap. You can get sort of $30, $40, £30–40 easily for a battery management system. But let's say you're going to go reasonably good quality and you're going to go for about 140. One of the unknowns that people don't know about, and to be fair on those that advocate lead acid, is that in the fray you will also need to cater for a desktop charger. That is, if you're doing it yourself, you will need to do what is called top balancing the cells, and you can do that with a desktop charger that costs roughly $60, £60, €60. So your total price for the absolute cheapest lithium iron phosphate that would work reasonably well is round about 610, call it 600 or whatever. This is more realistic, the mid range, where you're buying good cells from a reputable manufacturer and probably locally stocked. It has a good warranty, they've been tested, they're good. There's very little risk in buying from the person because they're local and they don't want to mess up their reputation and that sort of thing. So pretty much double the price. And so if you add up all your figures, you get to about just over £1,000, €1,000, that is quite doable for a do-it-yourself battery that is 280 amp hours. You're not skimping on quality. This is really good quality, a very, very good battery, very high quality with Bluetooth and all that sort of thing. Your final price is, if you look at a proper manufacturer, which will be somebody most likely local that is importing either pre-assembled, pre-top balanced, everything is working, everything is assembled correctly. So you'll pay between €1,500 and £2,500 euros for a 200 amp hour battery of that type. So for most of what we're looking at, we're going to be looking at the about 1,100 for a battery. That's what we're going to be looking at. Okay, so let's go there. Right, now we get to the sheet with lots of figures, lots of calculations. But in order to show you the true unbiased picture of whether you install lithium ion or stick with lead acid, or in a new build install lead acid, we need to be fair and show you everything in an unbiased way so that you can make your own decision. Many people will be pushing one or the other evangelists for lead acid or for lithium, but we're trying to be as neutral as possible in this. So we have 4 scenarios in here. The first one being a reasonably priced lithium iron phosphate, where you're not upgrading your equipment at all. Your equipment stays the same. The second is probably more realistic for existing motorhome or van owners or RV owners that need to consider the upgrade. This is more realistic in that you would probably need to upgrade some of your charging equipment, and not many people mention this, and this is the hidden thing that sits in the back of your mind when somebody's telling you the price of a lithium iron phosphate battery, and somebody selling you a battery is probably going to keep very quiet until you bought the battery and then say, oh yeah, you should actually change these as well. So just being open and honest about that. Lead acid, so that's your traditional old lead acid, and the cheapest possible do-it-yourself lithium iron phosphate build. We've excluded the manufactured lithium iron phosphate, but you could get the picture, because quite frankly, they're not that much more than about 1.5 the price of the reasonably priced do-it-yourself lithium iron phosphate. So we are talking about one single 280 amp hour of lithium versus 4 100 amp hour lead acid batteries. Just for interest, your weight is roughly 18 kilograms for your lithium versus roughly 100 kilograms for your lead acid. So if you're short on weight, this is something for you to consider. This is the reality of lead acid, and if you're on lead carbon, then wow, that's heavy stuff. That's even heavier. So you could expect that to be worse. So the installed capacity 280, 280, 400 and 280. However, just because we've installed 400 of lead acid, we don't get 400 amp hours out of that. We know that we can only use 50% of the capacity, of the stated capacity. So we charge to 100%, discharge to 50, and then stop, or we should stop unless we want to damage the batteries. Lithium iron phosphate, you can set the parameters. You have a battery management system that does it for you, so your batteries are looked after much better, if you like. And let's say you're not too concerned about extending the number of cycles or the lifespan, so you're going to charge up to 95% and discharge to no more than or no less than 5%. So you're going to use 90% of the capacity. So with lithium iron phosphate, you can happily use 90% of the capacity and still have them last many cycles, so 3,000 cycles, whereas lead acid 50% is all you can do. And that is debatable. There are a lot of people who have done tests that say that even 40% might be over ambitious. We've always been told for many years that 50% is the usable figure, and it may not be the case. So if you were to take that down to 40% of usable capacity, which I personally think is realistic, then you get a lot less. So basically the advised usable, or the advisable usable capacity for a lithium ion is about 250 amp hours for a 280 amp hour battery, and for lead acid it's about 200 for a 400 amp hour battery. Now the cost, this is a big issue. Lithium iron phosphate, 1,100 pounds or dollars. Lead acid 400. You can get a really cheap lithium ion for 600-ish, and that compares very favorably with the lithium ion phosphate, with the lead acid. But to be fair, and we don't see many people talking about this, these three lines here, the DC to DC charger from your vehicle's alternator, the MPPT controller from your solar panels, and your mains charger would possibly need to be upgraded. And we've put in some rough prices for a 30 amp, 350 watt and 20 amp. We don't see the point in having a really big mains charger if you're going to be on hookup for overnight or for the day or whatever. You don't need to charge rapidly. Everything is going to be okay. So we're saying 20 amps is more than enough. 20 amps is enough to bring most battery banks obviously from a completely discharged state to a fully charged state within a day easily. So that, to be realistic, if you are upgrading your battery in your vehicle, you will possibly need to upgrade this at 460 pounds, euros, dollars, roughly 400 to 500. So let's be fair. So here the final cost of the installation, if you don't need to upgrade your kit, at 1,100. If you do need to upgrade your kit, $1.5 grand. 400 for your lead acid, just to buy 4 new batteries and slap them in. And if you're going really cheap and you're not upgrading any equipment, then 600-ish. If you also need to upgrade your equipment, that'll bring it up to roughly $1 grand. So you can do the cheapest DIY lithium iron phosphate with upgrading your equipment with good quality kit for about £1,000, $1,000. So obviously your lead acid is half the price of the most expensive lithium iron phosphate installation. So 4 to 1, how on earth can you justify that? So the most expensive in amber here is changing to lithium iron phosphate with a complete change of the charging equipment. So if you were to look at these, and you could base your decision entirely on this is what you have in your budget right now, no more, no less, and well, definitely no more. And so that is all you can pay, is your 400 pounds or dollars. And so go for it, get your lead acid batteries if that's all you can afford. If you, however, you're looking on the longer term, then bear in mind that for lithium iron phosphate, without looking after the batteries too well, so just treating them, using 90% of the capacity, don't charge when they're below 0 degrees centigrade, all that sort of thing, you'll get about 3,000 cycles out of a battery, out of a pack. Whereas ambitiously you would get 300 cycles out of lead acid. Some state 400 cycles, especially the AGMs. Some say much less, some only say about 100 cycles, and there are all sorts of figures out there. So 300, we debated whether to put 250 or 300 cycles, and we went with a generous 300 cycles. We don't think you'll get more than 300 cycles out of most lead acid installations, even for AGMs, sealed batteries. We think it's about 300, 250 to 300, but let's say 300. So that means that your cost per cycle for your lithium ion suddenly comes into the picture. So your cost per cycle for your lead acid will be $1.33 or £1.33. If you upgrade your equipment, it's about 51 pence or cents per cycle, and that drops to 36 if you don't need to upgrade the equipment. And if you can go for the really cheapest, goes to 20 cents, which is starting to change that picture very much. So the most expensive per cycle then becomes lead acid by a long shot, and everything else you can see what percentage they are against that. If you look at the total lifespan for amp hours, you can see here that the cost per lifespan amp hour lithium ion is very low. It's not even a tenth of a cent, whereas for lead acid it is close to 1 cent. So you can see the differences there. Here comes the really the crux of the matter when you start looking at replacements. You could take the view that your lithium iron phosphate are for life, so 3,000 cycles. If you really look after the battery really well, only use 80% of its capacity, which is fine because you still have more usable amp hours than the lead acid. Under those conditions, if you look after them, you get 4,000 cycles out of the battery. That's, if you're going to use that battery for 2 cycles a week, average van user, two full charges a week, and you're gonna have that battery last about 40 years. Whereas with the lead acid, it's much less time. So if you look at your replacements, purely by the 10-to-1 ratio that we see here on row 17, your lead acids will be replaced 9 times. So it's for total number of batteries 10-to-1. That's a huge variation, and you can see the total cost of 4,000 for your lead acids compared with your lithium iron phosphate, which the most expensive is 1.5. A lot of people say the realistic replacement rate is actually 7-to-1. So here it's 7 replacements. We still 3,200 for lead acid versus the 1,500 for lithium iron phosphate. The big question is, would you actually keep a van for 40 years? Some people say, well, don't care about the battery lasting even 10 years because I'm sure that in the next 5 years something better will come out and it'll be cheaper and that sort of thing. So some people take the view that the lithium iron phosphate argument for longevity is null and void because they don't intend to keep the van more than 5 years, or as I said, they'll have something better. So these are all things that you need to factor into your thinking and your decision process. From a personal point of view, we lived with lead acid for a long time successfully. We made our coffees, we had our microwave, we could run hair dryers and hair straighteners and all sorts of things. Would I go back? We spent quite a bit of money on lithium replacement of all the equipment. I actually bought a fancy triple charger for about £730. Would I go back to lead acid? Not a chance. Once you've used lithium ion, it is so superior to lead acid in so many ways. I would just never go back, even with the challenges of not being able to charge under 0 degrees centigrade. But if you want to do a basic calculation on the actual figures, well, there they are.